Under Ukrainian Skies is an album of 13 songs, sung in English and Ukrainian, to celebrate the beauty, suffrage and hope of Ukraine and its people. At the time of speaking, Putin's war against Ukraine continues, though with setbacks on both sides. A number of these songs comment on recent events, spotlight the travesties of Putin's campaign, and echo the changing mood. My original Ukraine album, For Julia and Ukraine, was written from the 22nd of February 2022 until its release on the 29th of September 2022. The events of the war dictated what I wrote. However, I woke up one morning in early November 2022 following several significantly successful Ukrainian military events, and I realised that the lyrics I'd written were a kind of history of the war in verse. Moving forward, I wanted to write more lyrics to comment on what was happening in Ukraine more or less contemporaneously. Today, Putin is losing his grip and Russians are losing ground to the Ukrainian troops. There's a real sense that Putin will not get his way. Ukraine is primarily supported by the USA, UK, Germany and other NATO states, and is presided over by a savvy Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky. There's also a small but growing awareness of the truth about this war within Russian society. So, for now, we see that Ukraine can stand alone with support from its friends. Between writing the lyrics, song rationales, creating song compositions with my musical director Pete Diamond, I chose the types of singers and suggested the style of music production. On the 14th of May 2022, the Ukrainian Kalush Orchestra won the Eurovision Song Contest. However, the Eurovision organisers felt that the event couldn't be held in Kyiv for safety and security reasons. Thus, as the UK song came second, the UK and Liverpool were nominated to host the competition. With Eurovision in mind, I also wrote some lyrics to invest positivity in Ukraine and reflect the underlying feelings of the average Ukrainian. Thus, there is a difference in tone compared with the first album, For Julia and Ukraine. I felt an inflection point at this stage, allowing the songs to be more positive, to offer more hope and confidence, whilst retaining a hint of foreboding. I include 6 Eurovision-style songs to show positivity, all sung by Ukrainian singers. So let's take a look at the songs on the album in turn. Under Ukrainian Skies is the album opener and title track. After watching an hour-long BBC Panorama documentary about the women of Mariupol, I was minded to think that apart from the fighting, there was another war going on. That war concerned the women of Ukraine and how they managed to keep their families safe, warm and fed. Every day they fought to get enough food to feed themselves, look after and control their children and care for their disabled and elderly. This song is a tribute to their incredible strength. It should also be understood that many Ukrainian women are fighting and dying in this war. Chelsea sings this heartfelt song in English and Ella Yevtushenko in Ukrainian. It's Alright has a positive sentiment. In the end, it will be alright. There's a Dunkirk spirit in the people of Ukraine, which may be why we feel for them. It was the same for some of our parents and grandparents when they had their backs to the wall in 1940. Ukraine will fight to the end. To quote the Ukrainian Government Defence Organisation and reworking Churchill's of his June the 14th 1940 speech, "We will fight them on the beaches," quote, "We shall fight on the seas, we shall fight in the air, we shall protect our land, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight everywhere, on heaps of debris, on the banks of the Kalmius and Dnipro, and never surrender." The unprovoked attack perpetrated by Ukraine's larger neighbour has unleashed a massive wave of patriotism within. This has proved a determination and motivating offensive force on the battlefield. It's Alright is assertively sung in both languages by Savoy Sound. Fantasy is a pushback. Putin still thinks that Ukraine is part of a greater Russia and doesn't understand or accept that Ukraine looks towards Europe for its future. As Orlando Figgis, British historian and writer, wrote in The Spectator, Putin aims to destroy Ukraine as a sovereign nation and restore it as a vassal of historic Russia. His twisted vision of the family of peoples living in the lands of Russia, Ukraine and Belarus in the time of Kievan Rus in the first millennium. Putin's war is a war over history, but his history is fantasy. This song, Fantasy, is sung in both languages by Olaya.
From within, fantasy, fantasy, what else can...
It Is True calls out Putin's mindset. He tends to portray that everyone is against Russia. It's a call for him to look in the mirror. Because Putin keeps blaming the West for what happened in the past and for his fear of the future. Instead, he should look in the mirror. A dictionary definition of looking in the mirror is to consider, realise or admit one's own failing or culpability in relation to an issue. In May 2022, Finland's president Sauli Niinistö called for Putin to look in the mirror. He said that the Russian president Vladimir Putin should look in the mirror if Finland decides to join NATO to increase its security. Finland applied for membership in the US-led Western Military Alliance in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Tally Cord sings in both English and Ukrainian.
I can feel the heat from under my feet. I can smell the smoke causing me to choke. I can see the flames disguising your cheating claims.
Burning bridges is a metaphor for Russia's burning of international relations. The bombing of the Kerch Bridge linking Russia to Crimea saw Putin's multi-billion ruble bridge turn to rubble. At the same time, close friends of Russia, China and India, called for a negotiated end to the war. China and India stopped short of robust support for their traditional ally. Putin's actions have made more countries turn against them, encouraging Finland and Sweden to join NATO. On the 24th of February 2023, a year to the day after the war started, the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, has again condemned Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, calling for Moscow's immediate withdrawal and an end to the fighting. A year since President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion, which he's called a special military operation, 141 countries backed the resolution, calling for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. 32 countries abstained from voting, while 7 countries, including Russia, voted against. In between power cuts, Burning Bridges is sung vociferously by Volodymyr in both languages. Kraken celebrates the Kraken Regiment, a Ukrainian military volunteer unit, part of the Spetsnaz units of the main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine. The unit is named after the mythical sea creature Kraken. The unit was formed on the 24th of February 2022, the same day as the Russians invaded Ukraine. Veterans of the Azov Regiment formed the regiment. It successfully liberated several occupied villages during the fighting and became one of the more high-profile volunteer units in the war. Sung with gusto and power by Leandro Bastos in English and Marish Land in Ukrainian.
Look up, look down, they'll always set.
Go 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 is a Eurovision-style song that says to Putin, get out of Ukraine. And this is analogous to a former friend inviting themselves into your home, trying to take it over, then when denied, they then smashed the place up in anger before being forced out. Written as a Eurovision-style song and sung powerfully in both English and Ukrainian by Ukraina.
Go, 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 back to
Kherson follows someone born in Kherson in 1952 and who lived through all the Soviet invasions of Eastern Europe, with Russia being the big player, from World War II onwards. It runs through the individual's life and explains how the hope for freedom was dashed, firstly by the Soviet Union and then by Russia. Why Kherson? Because in March 2022, Kherson was occupied by Russian forces during their invasion of Ukraine, after the Battle of Kherson. On the 30th of September 2022, the Russian Federation claimed to have annexed Kherson Oblast. Subsequently, on November the 9th, Russian forces were ordered to withdraw from the city and regroup on the eastern side of the Dnieper River. On November the 11th, Ukraine announced its forces had entered the city following the Russian withdrawal. It was the first city taken from Ukraine by the Russian Federation and the first city taken back by Ukraine. Located on the Black Sea and the Dnieper River, Kherson is a major Ukrainian port and administrative centre of Kherson Oblast. It's home to the shipbuilding industry, a regional economic centre and a strategic gateway to the Crimea. In 2021, the city had an estimated population of 284,000. Sung with true determination in English by Leandro Bastos and the Rotlars in Ukrainian, we added the sound of gunfire to this song to underline that it is war, and unfortunately, people get killed. Slava Ukraini is a tribute to the Ukrainian forces. The song title means Glory to Ukraine. It's also a Ukrainian national salute, an official salute of the Ukrainian armed forces, and a symbol of sovereignty and resistance. It's often accompanied by the response, Glory to the heroes. Slava Ukraini is written for the Ukrainian forces who pushed the Russians back in territories many thought would be lost in the war. This song is sung with vigour in both English and Ukrainian by Denis Lubimov.
May we always, always remain free through Kiev, through Kherson.
Cold, Cold Heart shows how the war impacts ordinary people, depriving people of heat, light, water and food. It's about the missile attacks on Ukraine, where millions face power cuts in freezing weather due to the Russian onslaught. It opines that people are dying while others live in freezing squalor because of the damage missiles are doing to their towns, homes, workplaces and infrastructure. In winter, temperatures typically drop as low as minus 20 degrees Celsius. The chorus calls out Putin's reign of terror. You've got a cold heart from a cold mind. You have a cold soul. You're not just deaf, you're blind. Strikes on critical facilities affect all Ukrainians. Across Ukraine, missile and drone strikes continue to leave millions without electricity, heating or water. Many believe Russia's attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure amount to genocide, a war crime. The term genocide refers to an effort to wipe out a group of people. Russia denies having any such aim, yet Ukrainian people will tolerate this to be free, and no bombs will change that. This song has a folksy and intuitive, with an emotional banjo accompaniment within the song. The vocals, sung in English and Ukrainian, is by Tally Cord. Christmas in Ukraine is a heartwarming song about a Ukrainian Christmas. While there are hints of war, it's more about family. Its themes are love, hope and forgiveness. A traditional Christmas in Ukraine starts on the 6th of January, that's Christmas Eve in the Julian calendar. However, as that date is also associated with the Russian calendar, more and more Ukrainians are choosing to celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, following the Gregorian calendar. The Julian Christmas typically lasts until the Feast of Epiphany on January the 19th. Julia Chikasi sings this song in a Christmassy, sleigh bellsy way, in both English and Ukrainian. A New Year's resolution rounds up the year, which has been hell for Ukrainians. The word resolution in the title is not about a resolution to cut something out, except Russia, such as going on a diet, losing weight or ceasing drinking, but a call to stop the war, which would be a resolution of the war. It's about seeking hope, a better future. watching your children and grandchildren grow up, and for everyone to live a better life. It's thoughtfully sung in English and Ukrainian by Max Ravan.
Oh, you got a criminal mind, digs and steals what you can find. Don't have a skeleton, you have no spine. Steals what's yours and what is mine.
Criminal Mind was written for my Spid the Spider book series before the war. However, it resonates with Putin's personality. The lyrics are unaltered to raise a smile at how Putin might meet his end. Now you are caught, now your existence is naught. Got eaten by Charlie Crow, what a way to go. It's sung tongue-in-cheek by Suraya Gore.
You're a toe, you broke the code. Yeah, no one likes you, they're so insightful. You're a shallow, shifty and spiteful. You're a rifle.
There are limitations to being a military power. 2023 will bring peace and a new beginning for Ukraine and Julia. As the United Kingdom found out in Northern Ireland, as the United States of America found out in Vietnam, Afghanistan and Iraq, the USSR found out in Afghanistan, and now Russia is finding out in Ukraine. I'm reminded of Ludwig von Mises' words: if some peoples pretend that history or geography gives them the right to subjugate other races, nations or peoples, there can be no peace. Rightly or wrongly, it depends on what you believe, Russia has always wanted a buffer zone between their country and NATO. What would Washington do if communists were on their borders or in their backyard? Too late, they've done it. Here are a few ways the US dealt with hostile communist governments. The US has had communist governments close to them, in Cuba in the 60s, Chile in the 1970s and Grenada in the 1980s. Cuba. The Bay of Pigs invasion began when a CIA-financed and trained group of Cuban refugees landed in Cuba and attempted to topple the communist government of Fidel Castro. The attack was an utter failure. Castro had been a concern to US policymakers since he seized power in Cuba in the January 1959 revolution. Operation Mongoose was subsequently designed to do what the Bay of Pigs invasion failed to do: remove the communist Castro regime from power in Cuba. It also failed, but Cuba has remained poor for decades. In Chile, the popular unity government of President Salvador Allende was overthrown on the 11th of September 1973 by a military coup led by Augusto Pinochet. During a concerted attack on the presidential palace, Allende died, and the manner of his death became a subject of controversy. Allende was assassinated, and the ruthless and murderous regime ran the Chilean government under General Pinochet, masterminded by the CIA in Washington. On the 20th of September 2000, the CIA acknowledged for the first time the extent of its deep involvement in Chile, where it dealt with coup plotters, false propagandists and assassins. And Grenada. The United States invaded Grenada on October the 25th, 1983. The United States and a coalition of 6 Caribbean nations invaded the island nation of Grenada 100 miles north of Venezuela. President Reagan cited the threat posed to American nationals in the Caribbean nation of Grenada by that nation's Marxist regime. He ordered US forces to invade and secure their safety. There have been no more communist governments in America's backyard. We know that Kaliningrad is an oblast of Russia, an administrative division or region in Russia and the former Soviet Union. And just as the United Kingdom has the Falklands, Russia has Kaliningrad. Russia also controls Belarus, and one reason it tried to bully and invade Ukraine is allegedly to keep NATO away from Russian borders. They also want Georgia to the south to be neutral too. As Turkey is a NATO nation, this would form part of the buffer zone. Between Kaliningrad and Belarus, at the western end of Russia, is a 65-mile gap, the Suwalki Gap. In the possibility of Russia invading the Suwalki Gap, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, NATO states, would be surrounded by the Russian military. Russia wants security. Putin has always said that NATO is encroaching on the Russian state and doesn't want NATO to be on its borders. The United States knows this and has the same anxieties in its own backyard, in reverse, as discussed before. It seems that so many deaths and lifelong injuries are sustained because of the intransigence of both sides. People in the middle are harmed and emotionally scarred for generations. Here's what a neutral and buffer zone would look like. Why add Georgia to the south? Because Turkey is just south of Georgia and is a NATO state. Georgia is a buffer against NATO in the south. As well as the oil and gas supply issues, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has caused a worldwide famine in food products in developing nations. Between the 4th to the 15th of August 2022, Chinese military exercises around Taiwan flared up in the ocean surrounding Taiwan. Nancy Pelosi's Taiwan visit resulted in a Chinese air and sea blockade of Taiwan, causing further deterioration of China-US and cross-strait relations, and a potential flashpoint for a Far Eastern war. Taiwan's domination of the microchip industry has been a boom to the global economy. If a Chinese war envelops Taiwan, the country that manufactures most of the world's microchips, the whole world's manufacturing base would be affected, including China's. Nothing of the following justifies Putin's war, but as a historical byproduct of the situation, it's always useful to see it in a historical context. Robert Kagan spelled out the neocon case for NATO enlargement in April 2006. As he stated, might not the successful liberalisation of Ukraine, urged and supported by the Western democracies, be but the prelude to the incorporation of that nation into NATO and the European Union? In short, the expansion of Western liberal hegemony. After the fall of the Soviet Union, both the US and Russia should have sought a neutral Ukraine as a prudent buffer and safety valve. Kagan acknowledged the dire implication of NATO enlargement. He quotes one expert as saying, "The Kremlin is getting ready for the battle for Ukraine in all seriousness." Jeffrey David Sachs, an American economist, academic, public policy analyst, and former director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, has also written that the neocons championed NATO enlargement to Ukraine even before it became official US policy under George W. Bush Jr. in 2008. They viewed Ukraine's NATO membership as key to US regional and global dominance. Says Sachs, "If we think we're safe now with American President Joe Biden as president, we would be mistaken. Biden should have taken steps to rid his administration of the neocon influence. The Biden administration is packed with the same neocons who championed the US wars of choice in Serbia 1999, Afghanistan 2001, Iraq 2003, Syria 2011, Libya 2011, and who did so much to provoke Russia's invasion of Ukraine." Instead, the neocons wanted US hegemony, while the Russians battled partly in defence and partly out of their imperial pretensions. Joe Biden was vice president in 2011. According to General Wesley Clark, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, United States Southern Command, Paul Wolfowitz was responsible for the US defence planning guidance, made clear to Clark in May 1991 that the US would lead regime change operations in Iraq, Syria and other former Soviet allies. According to Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, a non-profit, non-partisan international affairs think tank headquartered in Washington, D.C., US policy towards Russia has primarily ignored such crucial factors as Russia's history, culture, geography, and security requirements. Here's a quote from ex-Secretary General Lord George Robertson in March 2022, giving evidence to the Commons Defence Select Committee. "I wonder whether or not this is a radical thought for me to give you. Did we goad him, Putin, into doing it? Was he assembling the troops around Ukraine to harvest some security guarantees, but at the end of the day felt that his credibility would be diminished if he didn't actually invade?" So there's quite a bit of evidence that the West, mainly the USA, actually, at best, sleptwalked into this war, with Putin angrily reacting to this NATO enlargement and encroachment. Did we give Putin the ammunition to shoot his way out of NATO encroachment? For this album, it's too early to say. Will allies, including Germany, give all the weapons Ukraine needs? Will Putin still be in power, or ousted for health or other reasons? The probable fate of Ukraine is in the hands of the United States, not Russia. Can the Democrats beat off Trumpism? Can the Republicans beat off Trumpism? Will the new administration continue the same financial support or lower its commitment? Will the USA financial and military support limit itself to the post-2014 map of Ukraine as a compromise for peace? This is the most significant factor in how the war in Ukraine will be settled. At this moment, no one knows. We hope for a speedy, fair and just settlement to allow Ukraine to prosper. But when you look at the history, as a distant observer, I pose a difficult question. Is it all Putin's fault? The answer is, yes it is, but... Several times, Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons to halt a NATO attack in whatever form it sees as threatening. However, recent research suggests that it only takes 100 nuclear weapons to wreak global devastation. There are about 13,000 nuclear warheads in the world. Roughly 1/3 are operational, a third's either in reserve or under upgrade and repair, and a third is to add threat, even though they may actually never work. But that means at any time, a minimum of 40 times the amount needed to destroy the Earth is available. 40 times the amount to destroy the planet can be available if the first wave doesn't work, and then the last 40 times what's needed to destroy the world. To quote the great Gordon Lightfoot, too late for praying. And my eyes well up when listening to this. Joshua Pearce and David Denkenberger argue that 100 nuclear weapons are the pragmatic limit for any country to have in its arsenal. Any aggressor nation unleashing more than 100 nuclear weapons could ultimately devastate its own society.